Sins that the Bible condemns. A deep look at divine warnings. Introduction. Sins that challenge God's holiness. The Bible warns us about certain sins that directly oppose the holiness of God. Among them, sexual sins hold a particularly serious place. Since ancient times, these transgressions have led to severe divine judgments, such as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were consumed by fire. Families were shattered, empires fell, and despite all the clear examples of the consequences, humanity continues to repeat the same mistakes. But what exactly does the Bible classify as sexual sins? Are all relationships outside of marriage condemned? Is there one sin worse than the others? Today, we will examine 4 sexual sins that the Bible condemns, with the last one being the most terrifying, bringing not only spiritual but also physical consequences that can affect entire generations. God's divine purpose for sexuality. Before we explore these 4 condemned sins, we need to understand one fundamental truth. God created sexuality to be something pure and sacred. Since the beginning, His divine plan has always been that intimacy should happen within the covenant of marriage between a man and a woman. Genesis chapter 2 verse 24 states, "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." This verse does not just establish the foundation of marriage, but also sets the boundaries for sexuality according to God's will. However, throughout history, humanity has repeatedly corrupted this divine gift, turning it into an instrument of moral decay and sin. The Apostle Paul clearly warns about the seriousness of this issue in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 18, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body." Now, let's examine the first sin on this list, a transgression that has destroyed kings, broken families, and left irreparable scars throughout history. 1. Adultery, the sin that destroys families. Few sins cause as much damage within a family as adultery. Since ancient times, the Bible treats this transgression with great severity, as it not only wounds those directly involved but also breaks the sacred bond of marriage, an institution established by God. In Exodus chapter 20 verse 14, we find a direct commandment, "You shall not commit adultery." Adultery happens when a married person engages in sexual relations with someone who is not their spouse. However, Jesus raised this moral standard even higher, making it clear that even a lustful look is considered adultery in the eyes of God. In Matthew chapter 5 verse 28, He declares, "But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." The Bible is filled with examples of how this sin brings devastating consequences. One of the most famous cases is King David and Bathsheba. What started as a simple desire ended in adultery, deception, and even murder. As a result, David faced severe consequences in both his family and his reign. But why is adultery such a serious sin? 1. It destroys families, trust is broken, and many homes never recover. 2. It attracts God's judgment. Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4 warns, "Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral." 3. It distances a person from God. Adultery is not just a betrayal of a spouse but also a violation of one's commitment to God. However, there is forgiveness for those who truly repent. In John chapter 8, Jesus forgave the woman caught in adultery, but He gave her a final warning, "Go now and leave your life of sin." 2. Fornication, a sin that society has normalized. The second sexual sin condemned by the Bible is fornication. Unlike adultery, which involves breaking a marital covenant, fornication refers to any sexual relationship outside of marriage. This sin has become widely accepted and even encouraged in modern society. However, the Bible treats it with great seriousness. In Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4, we find a clear warning, "Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterers." Why is fornication so dangerous? 1. It corrupts the divine purpose of intimacy. God established marriage as a covenant before sexual relations, but fornication reverses this order. 2. It leads to destructive consequences. Unplanned pregnancies, superficial relationships, and increased infidelity are just some of the outcomes of this sin. 3. It hardens the heart against God. The more a person engages in sexual sin, the more distant they become from God's path. Paul reinforces this warning in Colossians chapter 3 verse 5. "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry." 3. Prostitution and uncontrolled lust. Corrupting entire societies. The third sexual sin condemned by the Bible is prostitution and unchecked lust. Throughout history, these practices have not only corrupted individuals but have also destroyed entire civilizations. Proverbs chapter 7 describes the danger of prostitution as a deadly trap. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Proverbs chapter 7 verse 26-27. Why are these sins so destructive? 1. They enslave the soul. Lust becomes an addictive cycle, leaving people empty. 2. They corrupt entire societies. Values decay, families fall apart, and morality is abandoned. 3. They lead people away from God. Hosea chapter 4 verse 12 warns that a spirit of prostitution deceives people, turning them away from God. The Bible also warns about Jezebel, a queen who promoted both sexual and spiritual prostitution in Israel, leading the nation into deep moral corruption. 4. Incest and bestiality. The worst of all sexual sins, the last and most severe sexual sins in the Bible, incest and bestiality. Leviticus chapter 18 verse 6-23 clearly forbids these practices, describing them as detestable and unnatural violations of God's design. Why are these sins so severe? 1. They completely distort God's order. 2. They bring irreversible physical and spiritual consequences. 3. They attract divine curses and judgment, Deuteronomy chapter 27. Final reflection. Are we repeating history? Looking at today's world, are we repeating the same mistakes as Sodom and Gomorrah? Isaiah chapter 5 verse 20 warns, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." The Bible remains unchanged, and God's warnings still stand. If this message has touched your heart, share this truth and seek a deeper relationship with God. He is ready to restore and transform your life. 4.0